Hi everyone, and welcome back to Retro Legends. There are games that define a console, games that become icons of their era. And then there's Wipeout 2097, a video game that didn't just make futuristic ships race, but forever redefined the concept of style in video games. In the mid-90s, when the PlayStation was taking over the world and the gaming audience was changing, Wipeout 2097 arrived like a neon bolt in a rainy night. Fast, stylish, aggressive, and deeply connected to the rave culture and electronic music of those years. And today, in this video, we'll retrace its complete story. Media Group, vintage gaming magazine featuring Wipeout 2097, PlayStation game disc being inserted into console your stock, a distribute equally. Its birth, its development, the challenges, the artistic direction that made it a design icon, the contribution of music, technical secrets, untold behind-the-scenes stories, fun facts, public reception, sales, and the cultural legacy of a game that is still remembered today as one of the most influential titles of the original PlayStation. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Let's get started. To fully understand the importance of Wipeout 2097, we need to go back to 1995, a crucial year not only for Sony, but for the entire video game industry. The PlayStation had just arrived on the Western market and was beginning to show the world a new way of understanding video games. Until then, consoles like the SNES and Mega Drive had dominated, speaking mainly to a young audience of children and families. Sony, on the other hand, wanted to go further. It wanted to win over that segment of teenagers and young adults who were growing up with the new cultural trends of the 90s. It was a generation fascinated by electronic music, raves, London and Berlin clubs, neon-lit nights, alternative fashion, and the minimalist and experimental visual languages coming from England and Northern Europe. In that cultural ecosystem, Wipeout arrived like a declaration of war. It wasn't just a simple racing video game, but an aesthetic manifesto. Psygnosis, the Liverpool studio responsible for the project, already had a reputation for being an unconventional creative laboratory, an environment where artists, programmers, and designers found space to experiment without compromise. Already in the late 80s and early 90s, the studio had shown a particular taste for futuristic atmospheres, acidic palettes, motion design, and scenarios reminiscent of European industrial science fiction. But with Wipeout, Psygnosis saw for the first time the possibility of uniting three worlds: industrial design, electronic music, and pure speed. The first Wipeout, released in 1995, represented exactly this, a blend of visual and sound stimuli that was unprecedented in the video game landscape. It wasn't just a racing game, it was a cultural experience. The spacecrafts were modeled like high engineering products. The tracks, immersed in pulsating metropolises, recalled post-industrial London. The soundtrack mixed techno, breakbeat, and ambient with an energy that seemed to come directly from the clubs of the era. Those who tried it for the first time had never seen anything like it. For the first time, a video game seemed to speak the language of fashion, graphic design, contemporary music. The success of the first Wipeout confirmed to Psygnosis that they were on the right track, but at the same time highlighted new goals and room for improvement. The PlayStation was capable of much more than what had been shown in the first chapter, and the audience was changing rapidly. They demanded more speed, bolder visual effects, an even more refined aesthetic, and, above all, more fluid and polished gameplay. The development of Wipeout 2097 began practically the moment the first Wipeout hit store shelves. Psygnosis had realized they had something special on their hands, not just a simple futuristic racing game, but an aesthetic and cultural manifesto capable of defining a generation. The first installment had captivated an audience far beyond traditional gamers, thanks to an avant-garde artistic direction, a soundtrack linked to emerging electronic music, and a vision of the future that winked at European clubbing of the 90s. It was clear that a sequel couldn't just be bigger or faster, it had to become the natural evolution of a phenomenon. Initially, the project had a very simple name: Wipeout 2. For the first few months of development, the team discussed what it truly meant to create a sequel in a context where the PlayStation was still building its own identity. Sony saw Psygnosis as one of its most promising studios, and there was no shortage of pressure, but it was positive pressure. Everyone knew the series had the potential to become a visual icon of the platform. The choice of the definitive title, Wipeout 2097, came later, when the desire emerged to make the new episode much more rooted in a credible and distinctive science fiction imagery. The year 2097 evoked a concrete, technical, harsh, almost industrial future, very distant from the glossy visions of other futuristic racers of the time. The development, however, was not just a technical evolution. It was a cultural evolution. To make the game truly unique, Psygnosis decided to radically expand its team, involving figures from worlds completely different from gaming. Graphic designers, digital artists, illustrators of futuristic concepts, and even creatives linked to the British electronic music scene were recruited to give the project a stronger, more mature, and more coherent identity. This approach made Wipeout 2097 more akin to the production of a music video or an experimental science fiction film than to traditional video game development. A fundamental role in this transformation was played by the Designers Republic Design Studio, already involved in the first chapter but now an integral part of the creative process. Their brutalist aesthetic, rich in logos, industrial symbols, warnings, and texts that seemed to come from a future mega-corporation, became the visual soul of the game. The team discussed every detail: the shape of the vehicles, the colors of the teams, the track patterns, even the typography of the interfaces and loading screens. Nothing was left to chance. Every element had to communicate speed, danger, and advanced technology, as if Wipeout 2097 were a window into a world where anti-gravity races were a mass phenomenon. In parallel, the technical team worked to overcome the limitations of the first PlayStation. The goal was not only to increase perceived speed, but to make the tracks more fluid, more organic, more dangerous. The game engine was rewritten to better handle steep curves, elevation changes, particle effects, and collisions. The vehicle physics, less rigid than in the first chapter, were calibrated to give a sense of control, but also constant risk, as if every turn could turn into an opportunity for victory or a disaster. During this period, Psygnosis's offices were a vibrant place. Many developer memories speak of an atmosphere halfway between an experimental laboratory and a 1990s London creative studio. Cyberpunk posters on the walls, graphic designers working on new interfaces while programmers tested incomplete tracks, animated discussions about visual direction, informal meetings accompanied by techno music blasting from speakers. This environment contributed to creating a continuous creative flow where different ideas could influence each other. One of the most complex aspects to achieve was the sense of speed. In the first Wipeout, the speed of the tracks was one of the keys to success. In the sequel, however, something more was desired, an almost physical sensation. The developers experimented with simulated motion blur, dynamic track lighting, and visual effects that could give the impression of being inside a tunnel of light. The PlayStation did not offer immediate tools to achieve all this. So many solutions were created manually, optimizing every polygon, every texture, and every effect. The development process for Wipeout 2097 was anything but straightforward. Psygnosis at the time was a rapidly expanding studio, but also incredibly scattered. It worked on dozens of projects simultaneously, often with teams overlapping or sharing resources. Despite the success of the first Wipeout, the studio had neither unlimited budgets nor a rigidly organized structure. It was a creative, chaotic environment, rich in talent, but not without logistical difficulties. In this context, developing such an ambitious sequel proved to be an immense task. One of the first obstacles was the graphics engine inherited from the previous chapter. Although it had already set new standards for speed and visual style, that engine was not designed to support the much higher demands imposed by the new project. Wipeout 2097 needed more complex tracks, sharper turns, more detailed textures, and above all, a sense of speed that had to surpass anything ever seen on PlayStation. The team soon realized that an update wasn't enough. A nearly complete rethinking of the technical architecture was needed. The programmers found themselves facing a series of seemingly conflicting challenges. For example, increasing the speed of the spacecraft made it extremely difficult to maintain a stable frame rate. The faster the environment scrolled, the more complex it became for the console to keep up in drawing elements on the screen. To reduce the feeling of pop-in, which is the sudden appearance of objects at close range, developers devised creative solutions for progressive geometry loading, using visual tricks to hide the PlayStation's limitations. Many of these tricks involved placing side barriers, architectural elements, or strategic lighting changes that masked the invisible work of the graphics engine. Managing moving objects was another titanic undertaking. Every race in Wipeout is not just about tracks and ships, but also weapons, particles, light trails, explosions, visual and sound signals. Every traced projectile, every dropped mine, every light effect had to be rendered in real time without slowing down the action. To do this, the team employed a kind of visual hierarchy. Elements closest to the player were calculated with priority, while those far away were simplified or replaced with low-polygon versions. In parallel, artists worked on new weapons and special effects that required an unprecedented amount of experimentation for the time. Explosions, for example, were redesigned to be more satisfying and dynamic. No longer simple animated sprites, but compositions of particles combined with flashes of light that gave a more physical impact. The introduction of new weapons like the Quake, one of the most iconic in the game, forced the team to rethink the track structure as well, since a shockwave capable of shaking the entire track required complex management of the surrounding environment. Every technical improvement inevitably sparked new problems. Developers recount that the work proceeded as a long chain of compromises. If texture resolution was increased, the frame rate suffered. If fluidity was improved, details had to be reduced. If a visual effect made a section of the track more spectacular, it might end up introducing a bug or performance drop elsewhere. Many nights were spent searching for the perfect balance, testing small changes and carefully observing how the console reacted. In some cases, the team even had to invent new optimization procedures. One of the most significant was collision management. The first Wipeout was quite rigid, with harsh and punishing bounces. In the sequel, developers wanted a system that would allow players to feel the track without frustration, but at the same time convey the sensation of driving extremely fast and delicate machines. To achieve this, they completely rewrote the collision algorithms, making them softer, more realistic, and more rewarding. The true aesthetic revolution of Wipeout 2097 didn't originate within Psygnosis' studios, but came from the outside, from a collective that, in the 90s, was defining a new visual grammar. The Designers Republic, a graphic design studio from Sheffield that, even before working on video games, had already left a very strong mark on European visual culture. Their style was a sharp and ultra-modern hybrid, combining minimalist graphics, cyberpunk references, pseudo-industrial symbols, and an almost obsessive attention to branding. They didn't just create logos, they built entire visual worlds. When Psygnosis contacted them to collaborate on the first Wipeout, it was immediately clear that it wouldn't be a superficial partnership. But it was with Wipeout 2097 that this synergy reached its definitive form. The team didn't just design the interface or the covers. They brought to life a complete, credible, coherent, and instantly recognizable imagery. Every team had a precise graphic identity, with logos and patterns that truly seemed to come from a corporate future, dominated by technological mega-conglomerates. Every track had signage designed like that of a futuristic airport or subway, stylized arrows, indicators, geometric symbols, warnings in invented languages, all crafted to give the impression of a living, functional world. Their influence wasn't just visible in the menus or race screens, but in the game's very space. The way saturated colors were combined with metallic tones, the minimalism of the interfaces, the use of futuristic but highly legible fonts, the obsessive repetition of symbols to create visual rhythm, every element contributed to giving Wipeout 2097 a personality that no other video game of the era possessed. At a time when most PlayStation titles were still tied to fantasy, cartoon, or pseudo-realistic aesthetics, Wipeout 2097 appeared as a design object, closer to the world of advertising graphics and European clubs than to traditional video games. The Designers Republic perfectly captured the language of mid-90s electronic subcultures. Techno night flyers, IDM album covers, illegal rave posters, Berlin industrial aesthetics. Everything was distilled into a form suitable for a video game, creating something that was both accessible and incredibly sophisticated. It wasn't just a video game, but a visual manifesto that openly declared that the PlayStation wasn't aiming for a child audience, but a new, more adult, more urban, more sensitive to contemporary arts. 1. The result was sensational. Wipeout 2097 didn't just look good, it redefined what it meant to be cool in the world of video games. The packaging looked like it came from a design gallery. The posters seemed like advertisements for a new futuristic fashion brand. Even the promotional cards circulated in clubs as cult objects. Sony immediately understood the value of the operation. Thanks to Wipeout, the PlayStation began to be perceived not only as a powerful console, but as a lifestyle object, a symbol of modernity. If there's one aspect of Wipeout 2097 that's still remembered today with a mix of nostalgia and amazement, it's undoubtedly its soundtrack. In the mid-1990s, almost all video games used music composed in-house, often created by a small audio team or a single composer. That was the norm. Limited budgets, complicated music rights, and little attention paid to sound design as a marketing element. Psygnosis decided to completely break with this tradition, diving straight into the beating heart of European electronic culture. The idea was born from a clear conviction. Wipeout 2097 had to speak the same language as the young people who were turning the PlayStation into a social phenomenon. Young people who went to clubs, who listened to drum and bass and techno, who spent their nights at raves with fluorescent flyers and pounding speakers. For them, music wasn't just background noise. It was identity. It was style. It was belonging. So Psygnosis reached out to some of the most influential names in the global electronic scene, artists who had nothing to do with the video game industry, but who, thanks to PlayStation, were about to reach a whole new audience. The soundtrack featured The Prodigy, The Chemical Brothers, Future Sound of London, Underworld. Names that in those years were leading the cultural transformation that would bring electronic music from industrial outskirts to international charts. The result was a soundtrack unlike anything ever heard in video games at the time. It wasn't music inspired by techno, it was real, pure techno, with its wild energy, deep bass, and rebellious aesthetic. It was the same music playing in Manchester clubs, in Berlin's abandoned warehouses, or at London's sunrise raves, and now it intertwined perfectly with the dizzying speed of Wipeout 2097's ships. The effect for players at the time was explosive. The sense of speed, already extraordinary thanks to the graphics engine, seemed to intensify with every electronic beat. The turns felt smoother, the impacts more intense, the tracks more alive. The lights, the saturated colors, the futuristic logos created by the Designers Republic. Everything synced with the music in a way that was rare, if not impossible, to find before. For many, Wipeout 2097 was a true initiation into the world of electronic music. It wasn't uncommon for players to seek out the CDs of the artists featured in the soundtrack after discovering them in the game, helping to spread the genre even further. It's significant that, by 1996, the PlayStation was no longer seen as just a console. It had become a cultural object, a bridge between the world of video games and that of music. The decision to include licensed tracks from internationally renowned artists was also a financial gamble. At the time, no major publisher considered music a priority investment, but Psygnosis knew that Wipeout's strength lay precisely in its aesthetic language: modern, sharp, and grown up. The tracks in Wipeout 2097 weren't just simple race circuits. They were genuine architectural marvels of the future, designed with a level of care and style that few games of the mid-90s could boast. One of the most impressive aspects of the project was the philosophy that guided the creation of these circuits. Psygnosis wanted every track to be more than just a route to memorize. It had to be an experience, a journey into the dystopian and technological world of 2097. In the first Wipeout, the tracks had laid the groundwork, but they were still relatively linear and lacked verticality. With Wipeout 2097, the team decided to start from scratch, pushing for complexity, speed, and variety. The result was a series of tracks that felt alive, pulsating, almost like mechanical organisms, where racing also meant interpreting the environment, understanding its rhythm, and anticipating its critical points. The first major transformation was in the very structure of the courses. The tracks became longer, more intricate, filled with curves that allowed no room for error. Every trajectory had to be calculated with millimeter precision. A curve taken too late meant crashing or losing speed in an instant. This forced the player to learn the tracks as one learns the streets of a city, remembering every blind spot, every changing gradient, every dangerous stretch. Then came true verticality, a rare element in racing games of that era. It was no longer just a matter of left and right. Now, anti-gravity ships found themselves climbing sudden ramps, plummeting down rapid descents, or crossing sections suspended in midair. This three-dimensional aspect amplified the sensation of speed, giving the player a constant feeling of falling and rising, like on a high-tech roller coaster. Another distinctive element was the magnetic zones. These sections of the track, illuminated by a purplish or blue glow, kept the spaceship glued to the circuit even on the most extreme curves. Technically, it was a trick to allow for smoother and faster transitions, but aesthetically, it was a brilliant idea. A stylistic signature that immediately communicated advanced futurism, as if the track itself used intelligent technology. Crossing a magnetic zone felt like entering another dimension for a moment, more stable, more guided, only to return to the chaos of the race immediately afterward. There were also jumps, intersections, and complex junctions, elements that made every race unpredictable. Some jumps required perfect timing. If executed correctly, they allowed for precious meters to be gained. If missed, they led to penalties or violent impacts. The intersections, on the other hand, added an almost narrative rhythm. For a moment, you'd see other ships racing on upper or lower levels, as if the tracks were part of a gigantic urban ecosystem. Aesthetically, each track had a strong visual identity, almost as if it were a district of a futuristic megacity. The neon-lit cities recalled the perpetual night of a cyberpunk future. The industrial zones, with their rusted structures and glowing pipes, suggested a polluted yet technologically advanced world. The futuristic canyons created a contrast between nature and artificial engineering. The strobe-lit tunnels clearly echoed the aesthetic of techno clubs, with pulsating lights marking the speed. The contribution of the designer's republic was evident, having transformed each track into a kind of graphic manifesto. Every curve, every billboard, Every giant symbol painted on the asphalt seemed part of a coherent semiotic language, as if the tracks were arteries of a world governed by megacorporations and futuristic pop culture. One of the most frequent criticisms of the first Wipeout concerned its excessive difficulty, and above all, an often unbalanced weapon system. Some were too powerful in certain situations, others almost useless. The impact on the race was sometimes unpredictable and unclear to the player. Psygnosis took this feedback very seriously, and decided to rebuild the combat system from the ground up, transforming it into one of Wipeout 2097's most distinctive elements. In this sequel, every weapon was re-envisioned with a clear philosophy. It had to be immediately understandable, effective without being frustrating, and above all, it had to offer much stronger visual and sound feedback than before. The goal was to make the player feel the weight of each hit, the risk of each maneuver, and the power of each pickup collected. The game's big star was the Quake Disruptor, a completely new weapon that would forever define the series. It wasn't just a simple missile or a projectile, it was a shockwave that traveled across the track, physically shaking it and causing all involved ships to swerve. Seeing the entire circuit deform before your eyes, with lights flickering and vehicles jumping as if in a technological earthquake, was something never before seen in a racing game. The Quake wasn't just a weapon, it was an event. The damage system was also radically improved. In Wipeout 2097, it was finally clear how damaged your ship was. Sparks, smoke, interface vibrations, and a more communicative HUD transformed every impact into a moment of tension. It was no longer about abstract health bars, but a real sense of mechanical fragility. If you made too many mistakes, your ship exploded, and the race ended there. A real risk that forced aggressive but calculated racing. Behind the scenes, Wipeout 2097 represented a true technical challenge for Psygnosis. The PlayStation at the time wasn't exactly designed to handle complex and fast 3D models without losing frame rate stability. Yet, the team managed to develop a surprisingly fluid and stable graphics engine, much more spectacular than the first installment of the series. To give the player that feeling of extreme speed, the developers adopted some truly ingenious solutions. Among these, simulated motion blur, achieved through polygonal trails, made every curve and every straightaway even more adrenaline-pumping. Low poly textures were used intelligently, balancing visual detail and performance, while lighting, though simplified, was dynamically modulated to create a constant sense of depth and movement. No less important were the visual guidelines strategically placed along the tracks, which suggested the direction to the player and increased the perception of acceleration. The final result was a game that, for its time, truly seemed light years ahead of many other 3D titles. Fast, spectacular, and technically impressive, capable of making every race feel like an adrenaline-fueled futuristic ride. During the development of Wipeout 2097, the team made numerous unusual decisions, many of which profoundly influenced the final game experience. One of the most well-known examples concerns the spacecraft. In the early prototypes, they were enormous and massive, almost cumbersome small space vehicles. The initial idea was to give them an imposing visual presence, but during testing, it quickly became clear that they were almost unmanageable on the track. Players struggled to control them, and the races lost their fluidity and fun. After several experiments, the team decided to adopt a more streamlined and aerodynamic design, the one we know today. Light, fast, and perfectly calibrated for the crazy turns of futuristic circuits. Another curious aspect concerns the soundtrack, which has become one of the game's distinctive features. Some tracks were modified or reinterpreted to comply with the limitations of the PlayStation format, while others were compressed multiple times until the right balance between audio quality and disc space was found. The final result was a powerful and coherent electronic soundtrack, which amplified the sense of speed without sacrificing the game's atmosphere. Finally, the very aesthetic of Wipeout 2097 has very particular roots. It is said that the designers drew inspiration from their frequent trips to clubs in Manchester and Liverpool. There, immersed in electronic music until dawn, they observed neon lights, lasers, scenery, and crowd movements, elements that were then transferred into the futuristic world of the game. This is how the title managed to capture not only speed, but also a distinctive visual and sound aesthetic imbued with that rave and underground culture typical of the 90s. Wipeout 2097 was released in 1996 at a practically perfect moment. The PlayStation was on the rise, and Sony was looking for titles capable of cementing the console's image as a mature, modern, and innovative platform. It wasn't just about sales, but about defining a recognizable style for the brand. In this context, Wipeout 2097 hit the mark, receiving enthusiastic reviews and outselling the already acclaimed first installment. In many European markets, the game quickly transformed into a cultural phenomenon. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies and immediately became one of the console's most recognizable titles, attracting not only futuristic racing enthusiasts, but also those interested in electronic music, design, and the visual culture of the 90s. Three elements were particularly appreciated by the public. The soundtrack, a perfect fusion of techno, trance, and drum and bass that amplified the sensation of speed. The smoother control, which made the races intense yet precise. And the unique aesthetic, made of ultra-modern circuits, neon lights, and futuristic spaceship designs. Wipeout 2097 didn't just remain a video game, it became a true style icon. It was seen everywhere, not just in video game stores, but also in record stores, design magazines, and even in fashion-related contexts. The combination of music, graphics, and gameplay made it an icon of 1990s pop culture, a game that transcended the medium itself and represented the technological and cultural avant-garde of an entire generation. Wipeout 2097 had an enormous impact on video game culture. Not only did it influence subsequent futuristic racing games, but it also demonstrated that a video game could have a strong visual and musical identity, comparable to that of a film or a music video. Psygnosis continued the series with other installments, but many fans and critics consider 2097 to be the real turning point, the moment when Wipeout stopped being an experiment and became a cornerstone of the PlayStation. Even today, its aesthetic is studied in design schools. Its soundtrack is considered a milestone, and many enthusiasts point to it as one of the most representative games of the 90s. Looking back at Wipeout 2097 today means reliving an era when video games were becoming something new. No longer just entertainment, but art, culture, experimentation. The game remains a technical, aesthetic, and musical excellence, capable of captivating with its brutal speed and unmistakable style. And above all, it continues to remind us of a simple truth. When video games, music, and design work together, the result can become immortal. And with that, our journey into the past comes to an end. How many of these fun facts did you already know? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for more journeys into the world of retro gaming. Thank you for watching Retro Legends, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay retro, stay legends.